Beijing's circle of friends is shrinking fast. The leaders of an authoritarian bloc gather for a parade, a spectacle that burned through $5.1 billion. But what deceptions, distortions, and crises are hiding behind the show? Welcome back to FinalWar with Katherine Hu. On September 3, 2025, Beijing marked what it calls the 85th anniversary of Japan's surrender in World War II. But here's the absurdity. The communist authority itself is only 76 years old. This time, Xi Jinping presided over a military parade that cost an eye-popping 36 billion yuan, $5.1 billion. That's 125 times the cost of America's June parade. And while the tanks rolled and the missiles gleamed, Xi's own face told another story. Swollen, exhausted, unsteady on his feet. Behind the spectacle lies something far darker. Beijing's attempt to rewrite history, a performance to mask its weakness, and a desperate distraction from the crises closing in. Stay with me, because by the end of this episode, you'll see why this parade may be remembered not as a show of strength, but as Xi Jinping's last great illusion. A total of 26 heads of state and government attended this year's commemoration. But look closely. Most of them came from Central Asia and Southeast Asia, and that detail exposes the real problem. China's circle of friends is shrinking fast. Back in 2015, Beijing's parade drew a very different crowd. South Korea's President Park Geun-hye, Kazakhstan's Nazarbayev, Kyrgyzstan's Atambayev, Tajikistan's Rahmon, Uzbekistan's Karimov, Belarus's Lukashenko, Serbia's Nikolic, Czech President Zeman, South Africa's Jacob Zuma. The list went on, a showcase of China's international reach at the time, a symbol of its diplomatic success. The guest list has shrunk dramatically. What remains is a narrow, hardened, anti-American axis. Russia, North Korea, Iran. A lineup that highlights not global influence but isolation. And the symbolism was striking. Putin on Xi's right, Kim Jong-un on his left. For Kim, the moment carried historic weight. It was the first time since 1959 that a North Korean leader had stood on Tiananmen Square. Back then, it was his grandfather, Kim Il-sung. Now, more than 60 years later, his grandson takes the same spot. Think about that for a moment. The last time China, Russia, and North Korea stood together against the West was during the Korean War. But even then, their leaders never appeared in the same place, never posed together for history. This time, the photograph was the message. But what does that message really say? By leaning on this anti-American axis, Beijing is locking itself into a path of strategic dependency. Once that path is set, it is very hard to reverse. It is, in effect, a declaration to the world. China now stands openly against the US-led international order. And what does that mean for neutral countries? It doesn't attract them. It pushes them away. It drives more and more nations into America's camp. The danger runs even deeper. Diplomatic isolation is colliding head-on with a domestic economic storm. Deflation. A collapsing real estate market, vanishing consumer confidence, and every new stimulus policy fails faster than the last. Signs of policy failure are everywhere. This economic weakness doesn't just undercut China's global influence, it strikes at the very foundation of the party's political legitimacy. Isolation abroad, pressure at home, together they form a vicious cycle. And when the pressure mounts, the authorities has only one instinct: to lash out with more aggressive foreign policy, to escalate confrontation with the West. But that only triggers more sanctions, more isolation, and greater economic pain. Which is why this parade, so grand on the surface, may in fact be remembered as Xi Jinping's last spectacle. In our last episode, we exposed Beijing's greatest deception, pretending to be a victorious power of World War II. And this year's parade pushed that absurdity to new heights. The most obvious contradiction is history itself. The communist government was founded in 1949. That makes it 76 years old. Yet it now claims to celebrate the 80th anniversary of Japan's defeat in 1945. How does a 76-year-old celebrate an 80-year-old victory? It's like a teenager fresh out of high school declaring he already has a university diploma. A deception exposed by arithmetic. And let's not forget the most basic question. Who did Japan surrender to in 1945? Not to the CCP. It surrendered to Jiang Jieshi, Supreme Commander of the Republic of China. That surrender document is still preserved today in Taiwan's History Museum. The fact is undeniable. It was the Republic of China that won the war, not the PRC. And the casualty record tells the same story. Professor Ming Chu Cheng's research shows that during the war, over 200 nationalist generals died in combat. The CCP? It lost just 2 generals, one to illness, another in an accident. Why? Because Mao's wartime strategy was never about fighting Japan. It was the infamous 7-2-1 formula: 70% expansion, 20% dealing with rivals, only 10% resistance against Japan. In other words, Mao's plan was simple. Let Jiang Jieshi fight the Japanese, while the party grew fat in the shadows. The numbers don't lie. When the war began in July 1937, the CCP had 32,000 troops. By August 1945, when Japan surrendered, the Red Army had swelled to 1.27 million. That was not the result of fighting Japan. It was the result of exploiting the war to weaken the nationalists and build the party's own strength. And there's more. According to Japanese scholar Professor Endo Hamar, Mao Zedong even sold nationalist military intelligence to the Japanese at a high price. He went further, proposing a secret ceasefire agreement between communist forces and the Imperial Army. So ask yourself, what difference is there between that and betrayal? The absurdities didn't stop there. During World War II, retired US General Claire Chennault led a group of American volunteer pilots who joined the Republic of China Air Force. They fought brutal air battles against Japan, inflicting heavy losses on the enemy. History remembers them as the Flying Tigers. And yet, this year, Beijing invited Chennault's daughter and granddaughter to stand on Tiananmen Square. Why? To fabricate a false image that America and the CCP once fought side by side against Japan. But here's the truth. The Flying Tigers never fought alongside the CCP, not once. In fact, during the entire war, the CCP didn't even have an air force. The PLA Air Force wasn't created until November 1949. 4 years after Japan had already surrendered. So what Beijing staged this year wasn't commemoration. It was fabrication, a performance designed to steal someone else's victory and to rewrite history in front of the cameras. And then there is the most dangerous absurdity: using the parade to undermine Taiwan's sovereignty. Xi Jinping has repeated one phrase again and again: promote the correct view of World War II. What does that mean? It means rewriting history, tearing down the old pillars, and forcing the world to accept the CCP's version of the war. But the truth is recorded in black and white. The 1943 Cairo Declaration, signed by Roosevelt, Churchill, and Jiang Jieshi, clearly states, territories stolen by Japan, including Manchuria, Taiwan, and the Pescadores, must be returned to the Republic of China. The English text says exactly that, Republic of China, not the PRC. Here's the key detail. Even Beijing's own foreign ministry translations have never dared to alter those words, because this is international consensus. It cannot be rewritten. So what does the CCP do? It shifts tactics. Through massive propaganda, perception management, and parades like this, it seeks to slowly replace historical memory, to erase the Republic of China, and to quietly steal Taiwan's rightful place. That's why Xi Jinping does not parade for ceremony. He parades for intimidation. And in this show, the hidden political signals mattered far more than the weapons on display. So what was this parade really about? It wasn't just a military show. It was a performance designed to mask the authorities' shaky foundations, while hiding the fractures within its own leadership. First, manufacturing legitimacy. The Communist Party was never the main force in resisting Japan. Its version of history is fabricated. Its so-called heroes are invented. Its victory is a false claim, and the party knows that. It knows the truth is obvious to many Chinese and to the outside world. What's their solution? Put tanks on display, show missiles on live TV, and tell the people our fists are big enough, so we decide what history is. Inside China, the message is even more blunt. The party wants to remind its citizens that it commands overwhelming force. That no matter how bitter daily life becomes, no matter how deep people's resentment grows, they should not even think about rising up. The party holds the guns, and those guns are aimed inward. Why now? Because in recent months, spontaneous protests have erupted across the country, ordinary Chinese standing up to resist. For Beijing, these acts of defiance are a nightmare, and the parade becomes its answer, a giant theater of intimidation meant to frighten its own people back into silence. Second, concealing power struggles. Look closely at this year's parade, and the cracks inside Zhongnanhai are plain to see. The most glaring absence? Former party chief Hu Jintao. 10 years ago, Hu and even Jiang Zemin stood proudly on the Tiananmen rostrum, shoulder to shoulder with the current leadership. This year, Hu was missing. So was former Premier Zhu Rongji. Their absence is not a coincidence. It's a signal, refusing to lend legitimacy to Xi's hollow show. And there was another anomaly. Instead of General Wang Qiang, commander of the Central Theater, Beijing appointed Air Force General Han Shengyan to lead the parade. a break from tradition, and a sign that the military's personnel reshuffling is far from settled. What does this all point to? That shifts at the very top have already taken place. Xi can still appear in public, but increasingly he is a symbol, no longer the sole power behind the curtain. That's why the parade had to be staged, to project unity where division exists, to display strength where weakness is real, to tell both outsiders and insiders, Zhongnanhai is stable, don't even think otherwise. But the truth is the opposite. The more desperate the display, the deeper the cracks. And this parade, far from proof of stability, was in fact the most visible cover-up of the party's weakness. Let me end with a personal reflection. The parade took place on Chang'an Avenue and in Tiananmen Square, streets I know better than almost anywhere else. I lived in Beijing for 40 years, and for 20 of those years I walked that avenue almost every single day. It is a grand, beautiful boulevard, one I once admired deeply, and that's why what I saw this time struck me even harder. And yet what I saw in this parade was chilling. Behind the synchronized steps and polished uniforms of the Army, Navy, and Air Force, behind the exaggerated smiles and choreographed gestures of the students at the opening ceremony, what I felt was not celebration, but a theater of mechanical obedience. Every soldier's step, every salute, every column of weapons, all of it reduced to the cold repetition of authoritarian choreography. State media even revealed the secret of the training camp, the so-called parade village. Marching units were drilled to a line along 6 lines: the line of the head, the hips, the hands, the knees, the feet, and the bayonet. Trainers used laser beams to check the alignment. If any soldier slipped out of line, the laser triggered a warning, a perfect illusion of order, but with no connection to real combat power. And reporters uncovered something even more disturbing. Each soldier had 2 sharp pins placed in the collar. If he turned his head slightly, carelessly, the pins would pierce his skin. The goal was to force heads upright, faces locked in severity. Even after months of training, soldiers carried the habit with them, walking stiff-necked, eating stiff-necked, even going to the bathroom stiff-necked. Some no longer dared to sleep on their side. They had become, in effect, human robots. This is the true essence of the parade. A spectacle that annihilates individuality, that crushes basic humanity and turns men into machines. And the legacy it leaves the Chinese people? Not strength, not dignity, but extreme nationalism and a deeper economic abyss. Get the real story behind the CCP's shifting power games and see where US-China relations are headed next. Support the vision of a new China without communism. Subscribe now and join us in bringing the truth to light.